Time of death, 11:49 p.m. The doctor's voice was flat, final, done. But the janitor mopping the floor outside that door, she heard something else entirely. A whisper beneath the alarms. A thread. A heartbeat that the machines had already given up on counting. She dropped the mop. She walked through the door no one told her she could open. And the baby that the best doctors in the city had just declared dead breathed. She didn't know yet that the man weeping outside that door was the same man who had murdered her entire family 15 years ago. She had just saved his son. If this story breaks your heart, subscribe, stay until the last word, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The night Serena Hayes walked into that hospital room and changed the course of everything. She was mopping a floor. Not saving a life. Not performing surgery. Not doing anything that history remembers or people write down in the kind of language that gets spoken at funerals or awards ceremonies. She was pushing a yellow bucket on wheels down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, wearing a gray uniform 2 sizes too large with a braid that had been neat at 4 in the afternoon, and by midnight looked like something a bird had started building and then abandoned. That was who she was, Serena Hayes, third shift housekeeping, St. Raphael's Medical Center. 14 months on the job. Quiet, reliable, invisible. She had worked very hard to become invisible. The NICU was at the end of the West Corridor, Ward 3C. Serena knew it the way she knew every inch of this building. The hairline crack in the tile outside room 14, the ceiling light above the nurse's station that flickered every 22 seconds, the particular squeak her left wheel made when she turned the corner past the supply closet. She knew this floor like a musician knows a song they played 300 times, not because she had to think about it, because her body had memorized it so her mind could be somewhere else entirely. Tonight her mind was nowhere good. But then the alarms. She heard them before she reached the corner. Not the routine flatline tone, the single note warning that sometimes floated down the hall at odd hours and always meant someone was managing something. This was different. This was 3 alarms firing simultaneously, overlapping each other, each one answering the other in a cascading pattern that sounded less like medical equipment and more like something screaming. Serena stopped walking. Her hand tightened on the mop handle. Keep moving. Not your job, not your problem. You mop floors. She kept walking toward it, not away, because she had learned something in 32 years of being Serena Hayes. And the lesson was this: every time she had listened to the voice that told her to keep her head down and walk away, she had regretted it for the rest of her life. She reached the glass partition of the NICU and pressed her palm flat against it. Inside the room, 2 nurses stood against the wall, not working, standing, their arms at their sides, their faces blank with the specific expression of people who have just been told a thing they didn't want to believe. Dr. Caldwell, she recognized him, the attending neonatologist, a compact man with silver glasses and the confidence of someone who had never once in 30 years been wrong, stood at the center of the room with his arms folded across his chest. And in the incubator, under the lights, lay a baby boy. 4 pounds, if that. His skin was the color of wax. The ventilator beside him was cycling. She could hear the rhythm of it even through the glass. But the oxygen saturation monitor on the wall read 67%, and it was not climbing. It was falling. Dr. Caldwell looked at the clock on the wall. Time of death, he said, his voice carrying cleanly through the door that hadn't quite latched, 11:49 p.m. Serena pushed the door open. No. 3 heads turned. Ma'am, one of the nurses started. His airway. Serena was already moving toward the incubator, her eyes locked on the baby's neck, reading the angle of the tiny body the way she had taught herself to read 100 things that nobody had ever formally taught her. Has anyone checked for positional obstruction? You need to leave this room immediately. He's hyperextended. She leaned in close enough to feel the warmth of the heating lamp on her face. The neck, it's tilted back too far. The endotracheal tube is kinked at the upper trachea. That's why the ventilator isn't exchanging. He's not getting air. Dr. Caldwell stepped forward. His voice was very controlled. Who are you? Housekeeping. She didn't look up. Third shift. You're the janitor. Yes. And you're telling me that you can diagnose a tracheal obstruction in a 4-pound premature infant when 3 licensed physicians in this room cannot. Serena looked up then, directly at him. I'm not diagnosing anything. I'm telling you what I see, and what I see is that the secondary cardiac monitor on the wall, she pointed, is still reading, faint, erratic. But it's there, which means you haven't called time of death on a dead baby. She paused. You've called it on a baby who can't breathe because nobody checked his position. Nobody moved. Caldwell looked at the secondary monitor. The thread was there. 22 beats per minute. Barely, but there. He looked at Serena for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not belief, not yet, but the particular expression of a man whose certainty has just developed a crack in it. If you're wrong, he said quietly, you understand what I know. She had already pulled on gloves from the cart beside the incubator. If I'm wrong, he's exactly where he is right now. She met Caldwell's eyes. But I'm not wrong. 3 seconds of silence. Do it, Caldwell said. One of the nurses made a sound half protest, half prayer. No one moved to stop Serena. She placed 2 fingers beneath the angle of the baby's jaw. She had done this in her mind 100 times, not with a real child, never with a real child, but in the books she'd borrowed from the library and the medical videos she'd watched on a laptop with a cracked screen until she could recite the procedure in her sleep. She had learned it all, for Samuel, years too late for Samuel, and she had never stopped learning because stopping felt like letting him die twice. She tilted the head forward 4 degrees, no more, and stabilized the neck with her thumb and forefinger. The ventilator changed. Not dramatically, not with any of the theater that the moment deserved. Just a small, clean alteration in the machine's rhythm, the difference between a door jammed in its frame and the same door finally opened by the right hand. And then the baby breathed. His oxygen saturation climbed 71, 79, 86. The nurse, with her hand over her mouth, made a sound that wasn't quite a word. 91, 94. Secure that position, Serena said. Her voice was steady. She did not let it be anything else. You need a foam wedge 12 millimeters to hold the angle. And page Dr. Farnsworth. The tube placement needs to be reassessed tonight, not in the morning. She stepped back, removed her gloves, dropped them in the bin. The room was absolutely silent except for the new clean rhythm of a machine doing its job. Dr. Caldwell was staring at the monitor. He looked like a man watching something he would spend a long time trying to explain. How, he said. Not a full question, just the beginning of one. My brother. Serena was already moving toward the door. He had a condition, I learned. What's your name? She paused in the doorway. She almost didn't answer. Old habit. Serena, she said. Hayes. Then she went back to her mop. She didn't expect anything to come from it. That was genuine, not modesty. In Serena's experience, the world did not reward the unexpected intervention. It noted it, filed it, and moved on. She had stopped expecting reward years ago and found the absence of expectation to be a surprisingly efficient way to live. You did what needed doing. You went home. You tried to sleep. She finished her shift at 2 a.m, took the number 12 bus, made tea, sat at the table and did not drink it. Stared at the wall until the city outside went from black to gray to the pale, reluctant gold of early morning. She thought about the baby's hands, how they had been curled at his sides, like 2 small questions the world hadn't answered yet. She thought about 94%. She thought about 64%, which was the last number she'd seen on a different monitor, in a different hospital on a different night before the line went flat, and her brother stopped being a person she could call on the phone. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in 11 years. Not because she couldn't feel it anymore. She could feel it with a precision that sometimes took her breath away, but because she had learned to hold grief the way you hold a very full glass, carefully with both hands, without spilling. She went to bed at 6, set her alarm for noon. She had a shift in 10 hours. She knew something was wrong the moment she arrived. The lobby of St. Raphael's looked like a different building. 3 black SUVs sat in the ambulance lane with their engines off and their windows opaque. 4 men in dark suits stood at the entrance in the specific formation of people whose job was to notice everything. The nurses at the front desk were doing what people did when powerful strangers were nearby, moving with exaggerated normalcy, eyes down, voices quiet. Serena had grown up learning to read the geography of danger. She'd learned it young the hard way, the way you learn things that got burned directly into the bone. She recognized this feeling the way you recognize a song from the first two notes, not the full shape of it yet, but the key, the register. Something heavy had entered the building. She kept her face neutral, badged in, took the elevator. Her supervisor, Greta, found her before she'd gotten her cart to the corridor. Greta was a reliable woman in orthopedic shoes who had never in 14 months expressed anything more urgent than mild irritation, and right now she looked like she was standing on the edge of something she didn't know how to name. Serena. Low, careful. They're asking about you. Who? The people upstairs. A pause. The father of the baby. He wants to thank me. He wants to meet you. The distinction in Greta's voice was very small and very significant. Serena, do you know who these people are? Tell me. Greta looked at both ends of the hallway. She lowered her voice to the register of something that didn't want to be overheard. Corsetti, she said. Vincent Corsetti. The name entered Serena's chest like a key sliding into a lock it did not belong in. Not a full recognition. Not yet. More like the first note of a song she knew from somewhere. She could not immediately place the name, sitting just at the edge of a memory she'd spent 15 years keeping at the edge, never letting it come all the way in. I'll finish the East Wing first, Serena said. Her voice was even. She walked away. She mopped for 40 minutes. 2 bathrooms. The family waiting room. The corridor outside radiology. Her hands moved with the clean mechanical efficiency of someone whose body had learned to work independently of what was happening in their mind. Corsetti. She turned the name over and over, a stone on a riverbed, smooth from years of water passing over it. By the time the man in the dark suit found her outside the elevator bank on 3C, she had it almost contained. Almost. You're the housekeeper, the man said. Housekeeping, Serena said. Mr. Corsetti wants to see you. I'm on shift. I know that. His expression was the expression of a door, not hostile, simply closed. He'd like to see you anyway. The grammar of this kind of request, polite on the surface, immovable underneath, was something Serena had encountered exactly once before in her life, and the memory of it made her jaw tighten. Lead the way, she said. The private room was a different world. Laptops open on a rolling table, a security man in the corner. A woman older wearing grief the way elegant women wore dark clothing with precision and without visible seams seated near the window, with a rosary moving through her fingers. Medical equipment she recognized and equipment she didn't arranged around the incubator with the thoroughness of someone who had called in every favor in existence overnight. And the baby, still breathing, numbers holding in the mid-90s. She let herself look at him for exactly 1 second. Relief moved through her quickly, and she let it pass. Then she looked at the man standing at the foot of the incubator, and the relief went somewhere cold and quiet inside her chest, because what she felt looking at him was nothing she had a clean word for. Vincent Corsetti was mid-40s, younger than the name had felt, older than his years. Tall, built in the way of a man who had spent decades carrying weight of the kind you couldn't see. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on his son, in the specific posture of a person who has been given conditional permission to hope and is terrified of exceeding it. He looked up. His eyes were dark. Still. They moved over her face the way a man reads a document he needs to understand completely. Serena Hayes, he said. Yes. You saved my son. I adjusted a position. Your medical team. Dr. Caldwell told me what happened. His voice cut through hers, not rudely, but with the precision of someone who did not have patience for deflection right now. He told me that 3 physicians had declared Lucas dead and that you walked in and brought him back. Without a medical degree. Without anyone asking you to. A pause. He also told me that when he asked how you knew what to do, you said your brother taught you. The sentence landed in the room and didn't leave. Serena said nothing. I want to repay you, Vincent said. Whatever you need, name it. She looked at him carefully. There was no performance in it, no grand gesture, no dominance play. He was a man standing at the end of a very long night, holding a debt he genuinely intended to pay, and the weight of owing something to someone he didn't know was sitting on him like a physical object. She thought about the leak in her bathroom ceiling, the boxes in storage in Baltimore, the class she'd dropped for $47. She thought about Samuel. Nothing, she said. Vincent Corsetti was quiet for a moment. Then everybody wants something. Not everybody. He studied her face. Where are you from? Ms. Hayes, routine question. Conversational. The kind of thing you asked when you were trying to know a person and couldn't think of where to start. Serena opened her mouth, and something moved inside her. Something deep and slow, like a tectonic shift. Something that happened at the level of instinct before the mind had a chance to weigh in. Her real name, Donovan, the name she'd buried at 18, the name she'd replaced with her mother's maiden name, like a locked door she had painted to look like a wall, surfaced for the first time in 15 years. The name of the family that had died on Delancey Street. The family killed in a hit that had targeted the wrong address, and a hit that a detective had connected 6 months later, sitting across from her in a diner booth in the form of two initials spoken barely above a whisper. VC, she blinked. Once. East Side, she said. Her voice was perfect, steady, professional. I grew up on the East Side. Vincent nodded. He looked back at his son. Beautiful neighborhood, he said quietly. I know it well. Serena looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the stillness of his eyes fixed on the small, breathing body in the incubator, and she felt the world she had built over 15 careful years develop in that exact moment, a fracture so deep and so precise that she could feel air moving through it. She excused herself. She walked back to the corridor. She picked up her mop, and she counted her breaths 1, 2, 3, the way Samuel had taught her when they were children, and the world felt too large to manage, and she kept counting until her hands were steady enough to hold the handle without shaking. She did not go home after her shift. She sat in the hospital chapel on the first floor, a room nobody used at 3 in the morning with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up to her chest. The room was small and it smelled of old candle wax and something that might have been cedar. There was a single light on above the altar. It was very quiet. She had a shoebox at home. She hadn't opened it in 2 years, a personal record. She didn't need to open it. She knew every item inside it by heart, the photograph of her parents, the faded newspaper article, Samuel's unfinished letter to a girl he'd never had the chance to know better, the small St. Michael medal her father had carried every day of his life. She sat in the chapel and she thought about what it meant that she was here, that she had saved this child, that the child's father was Vincent Corsetti. That Vincent Corsetti had looked her in the eyes and asked her where she was from, and she had answered him casually, and he had said, I know it well, and he had not known, could not have known that the reason she knew the East Side was because she had spent 6 months after her family's funeral sleeping on the floor of a community shelter 4 blocks from Delancey Street, unable to afford rent, too devastated to apply for assistance, subsisting on donated meals, and the specific numbness that comes after grief has burned through everything else and left you hollow. She thought about what she was going to do with this. She was not a violent person. She had never been a violent person. Rage was something she had learned to convert into action, useful focused action, the kind that built things instead of destroying them. She had built a life out of fury slowly the way you built a wall from stones you'd found in a field. One at a time, without assistance. But she was a precise person. And the precision in her, the part that had read an infant's airway angle from outside a glass door, the part that had memorized anatomy from borrowed library books, the part that measured everything that part was doing arithmetic. She hadn't asked it to do. Her family was dead. His family was alive because of her. The arithmetic was quiet and it was devastating, and she was going to have to decide what to do about it. She sat in the chapel until the morning shift started. She listened to the building come alive around her, footsteps, voices, the distant rhythm of the hospital, resuming the daily work of keeping people on the right side of permanent. And 3 floors above her, in a room full of machines and quiet, desperate hope, a baby named Lucas breathed in and out with the steady, uncomplicated insistence of a life that had been given a second chance by the woman who had every reason in the world to let it end. He did not know her name. He did not know what his existence had just cost her. And Serena Hayes, who had kept a promise to a dead boy for 15 years, who had walked into a room she had no business entering and done something no one expected her to be able to do, sat in the chapel with her hands folded in her lap and understood with the cold, clean clarity of someone who had finally run out of distance to keep that the past had found her. And it had found her holding the most dangerous thing in the world. A reason to stay close. She went back the next day. That was the part she couldn't entirely explain to herself. Not the going back to work that was routine, that was survival, that was the rent and the bus pass and the $43 she put in an envelope every month toward a storage unit in Baltimore. The going back she could explain. What she couldn't explain was the part where she took a different route to the supply closet. The part where her feet, without being asked, carried her past the West Corridor, past the NICU annex, past the door with the private security details standing outside it like furniture that breathed. She told herself she needed to check the supply card on that floor. She did not need to check the supply card on that floor. The man outside the door, not the same one from yesterday, a different one slightly younger with a jaw like a closing fist, clocked her as she came around the corner. His eyes moved over her uniform, her cart, her face. Then he looked away. She was invisible again. Housekeeping. Not a threat, not worth more than 1 second of attention. She hated how much she had come to depend on that. She was 2 doors down pretending to restock the paper towel dispenser in the hallway alcove when she heard the voices through the slightly open door of the private room. She should have kept moving. She did not keep moving. The bone marrow results came back. A man's voice, unfamiliar, professional, clipped. "Doctor, I need you to understand what we're looking at, Mr. Corsetti." A pause. "Then tell me." Vincent's voice, lower than the doctor's, quieter. The quiet of a man who had learned that volume was for people who weren't sure they'd be listened to. "Lucas has a condition we didn't catch on initial screening. Severe aplastic anemia. His bone marrow isn't producing functional blood cells. Without intervention." Another pause. The doctor was choosing his words with the care of a person walking across ice. "Without a matched donor transplant, we're looking at weeks, not months. Weeks." Serena's hand went still on the paper towel dispenser. "A transplant," Vincent said. "A bone marrow transplant. We need a compatible donor. Ideally a direct family match sibling parent. We've already tested you and you're not a match." A beat. "Is there anyone else, other family members?" A silence followed that had a texture to it. Dense. The texture of a room where a man was doing arithmetic he didn't want to do and arriving at an answer he couldn't accept. "His mother is gone," Vincent said. "She died in delivery." "I'm sorry, other siblings, cousins, extended family." "I'll get you a list." His voice was controlled, but Serena could hear the seam in it, the place where the control was applied most heavily, the way you could see where a repair had been made on a piece of cloth by where the stitching was tightest. "How long do we have before it becomes critical?" 3 weeks, maybe 4 if we're aggressive with supportive care." "Then we have 4 weeks." It wasn't a question. It was a decision. The way he said it told her everything about who he was, the kind of man who heard a deadline and immediately began working backward, from it converting terror into logistics. Because logistics was something you could control and terror was not. "Get me every specialist in the country who has done this procedure. I want names on my desk by tonight." "Mr. Corsetti, tonight." She heard the doctor leave through a different door. She stood in the alcove for a moment, not moving. 3 weeks. The baby she had kept alive 2 nights ago had 3 weeks to live unless someone's bone marrow matched his. And his father, the man whose organization had destroyed her life, who stood in that room 3 feet of drywall away from her and did not know her real name, was about to spend whatever it cost to find that match. She picked up her cart and walked away. Fast. Her mind was working the way it worked when she couldn't stop it, which was quietly and completely and without mercy. She knew enough about aplastic anemia to know what the numbers looked like. She knew enough about bone marrow compatibility to know that family matches were rare even among direct relatives, and that unrelated donor matches were rarer still, and that the registry search process took time that a 3-week window did not generously allow. She knew one other thing. She had a blood type O negative universal donor, and she had a genetic profile that she'd had run 2 years ago through a medical research study at the university, partly out of scientific curiosity, and partly because some part of her had never stopped preparing for a medical emergency she couldn't predict. The results were in a folder in her apartment between her tax returns and a spare set of keys. She did not let herself finish that thought. She finished her shift. She mopped the east corridor, the second-floor bathroom, the waiting area outside the ER. She did not think about Lucas Corsetti. She thought about her grocery list, about whether the number 12 bus was running on time, about the left rear tire on a car she didn't own. She was almost convincing. She was at the supply room clocking out when Greta appeared again. Different energy today, not anxious exactly, more like a woman delivering a message she'd been asked to deliver and wasn't sure how she felt about being asked. "He sent something for you," Greta said. Serena looked at her. Greta held out an envelope, thick, cream-colored, the kind of paper that cost more than Serena's lunch. "The man on 3C, he had it left at the front desk." Serena took it. She opened it in the stairwell, standing under the fluorescent light that buzzed slightly on the inhale. Inside a card, no printed logo, just a name, Vincent Corsetti, engraved at the top in small, precise letters. Beneath it, handwritten in ink that pressed harder than it needed to a single line, "I don't know how to thank someone who won't let me. So I'm asking instead. Dinner, tonight. My family owes you that much." And below it, a number. She stared at the card for a long time. Then she put it in her uniform pocket and walked down the stairs and out into the cold air of the parking lot and stood there breathing for 30 seconds, which was all she allowed herself before she started walking to the bus stop. She did not call the number. She went home. She made soup she didn't eat. She sat at the kitchen table. The shoebox was on the shelf where she'd left it. She looked at it from across the room. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Ms. Hayes?" Not surprised. The voice of a man who had been told she would call and had believed it. "I'm not coming to dinner," she said. "All right. And I don't want anything from you." "You've said that?" "I'm saying it again." She paused. She hadn't planned what came next. It arrived on its own, fully formed the way the truest things did. "I heard the doctor earlier today. I wasn't listening on purpose. I was on the floor." A silence. Then, "How much did you hear enough?" Another silence, this one longer. She could hear him breathing, slow, deliberate, the breath of a man who was deciding something. "Then you know," he said. "I know he's sick. He's dying." The word landed without cushioning. She realized that might have been the first time he'd said it out loud. The particular rawness in the consonants suggested something that had been held in and was only now in this phone call with a stranger being released into actual air. "They need a donor, a match. My entire family has been tested. Nobody qualifies." Serena said nothing. "I have people searching the National Registry," Vincent continued. "Private labs, researchers, specialists. I am using every resource I have. But the timeline..." He stopped. 3 weeks is not enough time to run a full registry search, even with the best team in the country. "I know." "Do you?" Not a question. He said it the way you said something when you suspected the other person knew more than they were letting on, and you were waiting to see whether they would close the distance or hold it. Serena looked at the shoebox. "I have an unusual blood type," she said. "Oh, negative. And I had a genetic profile run 2 years ago. I can have the results sent to your medical team." She stopped. "That's not an offer. I'm just saying it's data. They can check it against Lucas's profile. If it doesn't match, it doesn't matter. If it does..." She stopped again. "I don't know yet what it means if it does." A very long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Something in it had come loose from the place where he kept things controlled. "Why would you do this?" "I told you. I had a brother." She said it simply without ornament. "He died because nobody did anything in time. I made a promise. To him. To him." Vincent was quiet for so long she thought the call had dropped. Then, "What was his name?" She almost said, "Samuel Donovan." It was right there. She felt it in her mouth. "Samuel," she said, "just the one name. Just that much." "I'm sorry," Vincent said. And it sounded, God help her, it sounded genuine. It sounded like a man saying 2 words that cost him something. Not a reflex, not a social obligation. "I'm sorry," like he meant them as a small and insufficient gesture towards something much larger that he didn't have words for yet. She hated that it sounded genuine. She hated that she noticed. "I'll send the file in the morning," she said, and she ended the call before he could say anything else that she might accidentally believe. She sat at the table for a long time after. She was not naive. She knew what she was doing, or rather, she knew what it looked like from the outside, which was a woman making a decision she had no business making, wading deeper into a life she had every reason to stay away from, attaching herself to a story that had already nearly destroyed her once. She knew all of this. The knowing didn't stop anything. It never had. Knowing the shape of a thing and being able to stop yourself from walking into it were two entirely different skills, and she had only ever mastered the first. She sent the genetic file at 7 the next morning. By 9:30, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Hayes? A woman's voice, crisp, medical. This is Dr. Farnsworth, head of the transplant team at St. Raphael's. I've been reviewing the profile you submitted. Serena sat up straighter. And a brief pause, the kind that preceded information the speaker was still deciding how to frame. The compatibility markers are unusual. I don't want to overstate before we run a confirmatory panel, but what I'm seeing suggests a significant match potential, significantly higher than anything else we've found in the registry search so far. Serena's heart did something that wasn't quite a beat, more like a stutter. How significant? Ms. Hayes, I need you to come in today if possible. I'd like to run the confirmatory panel in person and talk through what this would mean medically if the match holds. She closed her eyes. I'll come in at noon. She hung up. She sat perfectly still for 60 seconds. Then she got up, made coffee, and called into Greta to say she'd be coming in later than usual. Is everything all right? Greta asked. Fine, Serena said. Everything's fine. The lie tasted like something she'd said so many times it had stopped tasting like anything at all. She arrived at St. Raphael's at noon through the front entrance instead of the staff entrance, which felt strange, like wearing someone else's shoes. Dr. Farnsworth met her in a small conference room on the 4th floor. A compact woman in her 50s, dark hair going gray at the temples, the manner of someone who had spent a career delivering news of all possible varieties and had learned to deliver all of it with the same measured precision. The confirmatory panel took 40 minutes. Farnsworth reviewed the results for 3 minutes without speaking, which Serena found nearly unbearable. You're a match, Farnsworth said finally. She looked up. A strong one. The compatibility on the critical markers is 91%. She paused, and for a moment something that wasn't purely clinical crossed her face. That's genuinely remarkable for an unrelated donor. Serena looked at the table. I should tell you, Farnsworth continued, that Mr. Corsetti doesn't know you've submitted your profile. As far as he's aware, we're still running registry candidates. I know. Do you want him informed? Serena thought about last night, the phone call, the way he'd said, I'm sorry, like it cost him something. The way he'd asked Samuel's name. Not yet, she said. Farnsworth nodded once professionally with the discretion of a woman who had learned that the human beings behind medical cases were complicated in ways that the paperwork never captured. I do need to walk you through the procedure. Bone marrow donation at this level, given Lucas's condition and the match percentage, would require a significant harvest. It's a surgical procedure. There are risks. I know the risks. Ms. Hayes, I've read about it extensively. She looked up and met Farnsworth's eyes. I know it's not minor. I know about the anesthesia risk, the recovery timeline, the possible complications. I know all of it. A pause. Tell me what Lucas's odds are with a successful transplant. Farnsworth held her gaze. With a 91% match and no complications. 70 to 80% survival rate. And without a transplant, a beat, less than 5% in 3 weeks. Serena nodded. The arithmetic was clean. She hated how clean it was. She hated that there was no ambiguity in it, no gray area she could retreat into and tell herself she was still deciding. The numbers had decided. The numbers had decided the moment she'd called with her genetic file, and she had known that when she called, and she had called anyway. Schedule it, she said. Farnsworth's expression shifted slightly. I have to ask, are you certain this isn't something you need to decide today? We have some time. Schedule it, Serena said again. Please. She left the hospital an hour later. She walked to the bus stop, sat down, and put her hands on her knees. A woman sitting beside her on the bench was reading a paperback novel, completely absorbed. A man walked past with a coffee in each hand. A cab horn sounded somewhere down the block. The ordinary world going about itself entirely unaware. Serena stared at the street. She was going to donate bone marrow to the son of the man who had killed her family. She was going to do it voluntarily with full knowledge, in the quiet and deliberate way she did every hard thing she had ever done in her life. And she was going to do it without telling Vincent Corsetti who she was, without telling him what it meant, without asking anything from it except the thing she had asked of herself since the night Samuel died with his head on her shoulder and his last breath in her hair, that she would not let anyone die the way he died. Not if she could stop it. The bus came. She got on. She found a seat by the window and looked out at the city, moving past her, the buildings, the signs, the people who all had their own locked boxes of damage and history and things they carried without anyone seeing. And she thought about her brother, who had been 17 years old and funny and terrible at math, and had wanted to be a mechanic, who had been afraid of spiders and kind of strangers, and who had never in his short life done a single thing to anyone that warranted what had happened to him. She thought about Lucas Corsetti, who had done even less, who was less than a week old and already fighting for his life in a room surrounded by machines, and the desperate love of a father who had done terrible things and was only now for the first time encountering a consequence he could not manage or negotiate or buy his way out of. She thought about what it meant to choose something that cost you everything and got you nothing back except the right to look at yourself in the mirror. She thought about the meeting she had not yet agreed to attend, the dinner invitation. She had not accepted the conversation she was going to have to navigate from a position of knowing everything while pretending to know nothing. She thought about the moment it was coming. She could feel it the way you felt weather when Vincent Corsetti would find out who she was. When the distance she had maintained for 15 years would collapse completely, and she would be standing on the other side of it, fully exposed with nothing left between herself and the thing she had never been able to finish grieving. She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass. The bus moved through the city like something that didn't know where it was going, but was committed to the direction. She understood exactly how that felt. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out. An unknown number, different from Farnsworth's, different from Vincent's. A text message. 3 words. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes." She stared at the screen. He knew. Farnsworth had told him something. Not everything maybe, but enough. The procedure, the match, the choice she had made in the conference room 40 minutes ago that she had not yet told another living soul. She typed back 2 words, "Don't thank me." She put the phone away. She watched the city out the window, and she kept her hands very still in her lap. And she thought with the cold, precise, unflinching part of herself that had kept her alive through things that should have broken her, that she was standing at the edge of the most dangerous thing she had ever done. Not the donation, the staying. The pre-op appointment was scheduled for Thursday morning. Serena arrived 12 minutes early, which was how she arrived at everything early enough to orient herself. Not so early that she'd have to sit and think. Thinking was the enemy of forward motion, and forward motion was the only thing she'd trusted since she was 17 years old. Dr. Farnsworth walked her through the procedure with the clean efficiency of someone who respected a patient's intelligence. Harvest under general anesthesia. Posterior iliac crest. Recovery time 2 to 4 weeks depending on individual response. Possible side effects: fatigue, lower back pain, in rare cases nerve involvement. She said all of it in the same measured tone, and Serena nodded at each item the way you nodded at things you'd already accounted for. "Any questions?" Farnsworth asked when she finished. "When can we do it?" "We'd like to move quickly given the timeline. I was thinking next Friday, assuming your pre-op blood work clears." "It'll clear," Serena said. Farnsworth studied her for a moment with the particular attention of a doctor who treated the whole person and not just the case file. "Ms. Hayes, I want to ask you something and you don't have to answer." "Then ask." "Why are you doing this? And I don't mean medically. I mean," she paused, "you are not family. You have no legal obligation. The procedure carries real risk, and you've been very careful about how much contact you have with the Corsetti family." A beat. "I'm asking because it's my job to make sure my donors are in the right headspace, not because I doubt your decision." Serena was quiet for a moment. "I made a promise a long time ago," she said finally, "to someone who didn't get to collect on it. This is the closest I've ever come to keeping it." Farnsworth nodded slowly. She wrote something in the folder. She did not press further. That was the thing Serena had come to respect about her. She knew which doors to open and which ones to leave closed. She was leaving the consultation room when she nearly walked directly into Vincent Corsetti. He was in the hallway. Not waiting for her, he looked as surprised as she did, which was the first time she'd seen him look surprised by anything. He was coming from the direction of the NICU annex, probably the 10 o'clock visit his team had arranged with the nursing staff every morning. He had a paper cup of coffee in one hand. He was wearing a dark jacket that probably cost more than her monthly rent and looked like he hadn't slept since Tuesday. They stopped, 3 feet of corridor between them. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "Mr. Corsetti." He looked at the door she'd come out of, at the folder under her arm. His expression did something careful and controlled. "You just met with Farnsworth." "Routine follow-up," she said. "It's not routine." He said it without accusation, just statement of fact. "She told me there was a viable donor. She didn't give me a name. I didn't ask." He looked at her steadily. "But you're coming out of her office with a pre-op file." Serena held his gaze. "I'm a match," she said. "A good one, 91%. The silence that followed was the longest 4 seconds Serena had experienced since the night the alarms went off in the NICU. She watched something move through Vincent Corsetti's face, not the controlled, managed expression she'd seen on him in every previous encounter, but something raw and unguarded that surfaced for just a moment before he got hold of it again. His jaw tightened. He looked away from her, then back. "You were going to do this without telling me," he said. "I was going to do it, period." "Why?" "I already answered that question." "Samuel," he said. Just the name, quietly. "Yes." He looked down at the coffee cup in his hand like he'd forgotten it was there. When he looked up again, something in his eyes was different, not softer exactly, but less defended, like a wall that had been lowered by one tear. "I don't understand you," he said. "You don't need to. You saved my son's life twice the second time before I even knew you were trying, and you won't let me give you anything. You won't tell me who you are. You won't let me say thank you properly." He paused. "Most people who do things for me want something. You're the first person in 20 years who's made me feel like I owe something I genuinely can't pay back." "You can't," she said. It came out evenly, almost gently. "That's not your fault." He looked at her with the expression of a man who heard something in those words that he couldn't quite locate but couldn't dismiss either. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Moneza, not as a transaction, not so I can repay you, just—" He stopped. "My son is upstairs and I need to talk to someone who isn't on my payroll or afraid of me, and you're the only person I've met in recent memory who qualifies on both counts." She should have said no. She said 1 hour. He almost smiled. It was the ghost of a smile, the memory of one maybe surfacing from somewhere that had been closed off for a long time. 1 hour, he agreed. She was already calculating how badly this could go. The answer was very, catastrophically, in ways she couldn't yet fully map. She went anyway. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty. At 11 in the morning, the pre-lunch lull, just a few nurses on break and an orderly eating something from a container by the window. Not the dinner he'd originally proposed, just a table and 2 cups of coffee and the particular intimacy of a public space that happened to be quiet. He sat across from her, and for a moment neither of them spoke, which was fine. Serena had never been afraid of silence. Silence was where you learned the most about a person, what they reached for when words ran out, whether they filled it with noise or let it sit. Vincent Corsetti let it sit. "His mother," he said finally. "Elena, she was the good part of what I built, the part that made the rest of it bearable." He looked at the table. "She died 40 hours after Lucas was born. Complication they didn't catch in time." A pause. "So he came into the world and she left it at almost exactly the same moment, and then 3 days later the doctors told me he was dying too, and I sat in that room and thought—" He stopped. "You thought you were being punished," Serena said. He looked up. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I thought." She nodded. She knew that thought. She knew it from the inside, from the version of it that had lived in her chest for 15 years. The question of whether the universe was punishing her specifically or whether it was simply indifferent, which was in some ways worse. "Are you," she asked, "religious?" "I was raised Catholic." A pause. "I'm not sure what I am now." "That's honest." "I try to be honest when it doesn't cost me anything professionally." He said it with a dryness that surprised her, the first thing he'd said that had any lightness in it at all. Then it passed. I've done things, Ms. Hayes, things I justified to myself at the time using the logic of necessity, survival, protecting what was mine. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Elena always said that logic was a coward's substitute for conscience. She was right. She was usually right about those things, and I was usually too proud to say so while she was alive. Serena was very still. This was dangerous. This was the most dangerous thing he'd done. Not the power, not the men in suits outside the door, not any of it. This sitting across a cafeteria table telling her the truth about himself in the honest, unguarded way of a man who had no one left to tell. This was the thing that could make her forget what she knew. This was where she needed to be most careful. What kind of things, she said. Her voice was even, professional, casually curious. He looked at her for a moment. Decisions that affected people who didn't deserve to be affected. Collateral damage, they call it. The phrase was flat in his mouth like something he'd used a long time ago and had lost the taste for. That's what you call it when you don't want to count the full product. Serena's hands were in her lap under the table. She pressed them flat against her thighs. Did you ever count it? She asked. I'm trying to, he said. Now, she looked at him across the table at the exhaustion in his face, the grief he was carrying in the two directions at once, the strange and genuine quality of his remorse, and she felt the fracture that had opened in her chest the first night she heard his name widen by another degree. Not because she was forgiving him. She was not forgiving him. Forgiveness was a word she'd spent 15 years having no use for, and she wasn't about to take it down from the shelf because a man had bought her a cup of coffee and told her his wife was dead. But she was looking at him, that was the problem. She was actually looking at him, and what she saw was a human being in genuine pain, and the part of her that had learned to see human beings in pain, the same part that had walked through a door she wasn't supposed to open and pressed her fingers under an infant's jaw and counted to 4 degrees. That part could not be turned off with any amount of willpower she'd ever been able to generate. She hated that. She hated it the way you hated weather. I should get back, she said. He nodded. The procedure. Next Friday, so on. Farnsworth told you the date. She told me it was moving forward. I inferred the date from the scheduling board. He looked at her directly. I want you to know whatever happens, I will make sure you are taken care of. Medically, financially, anything you need during recovery. Mr. Corsetti. Vincent, she paused. I don't need to be taken care of. I know you don't need it. His voice was very quiet. Let me do it anyway. Not as payment, just as a person doing something for another person. He held her gaze. You've been carrying everything alone for a long time. I can see it. I recognize it because I used to do the same thing. She stood up. She pushed her chair back with a care that was almost formal. Thank you for the coffee, she said. She walked away. She got 3 tables before she stopped. She stood there for 2 full seconds. Then she turned around. Vincent? It was the first time she'd said his name. It felt like stepping on ice and finding it held. He looked up. My brother's full name was Samuel, she said. He was 17. He wanted to be a mechanic. He was afraid of spiders. She stopped. I just thought you should know his name. The whole name. She paused. Samuel. She left before his expression could fully form. She made it to the stairwell. She sat down on the 3rd step and pressed her back against the wall and breathed in the way that Samuel had taught her, slow, counted, deliberate, until the shaking in her hands had reduced to a manageable tremor. She had not planned to say that. She had not planned any of it. She was very, very good at planning, and she had walked into that cafeteria with a plan, and the plan had lasted approximately 4 minutes. She was losing distance. That was what was happening. The 15 years of careful managed distance between herself and that night on Delancey Street, the distance she had built one deliberate choice at a time, one moved city, one changed name, one locked box, one mopped floor, it was collapsing. Not because she was weak, because he was not what she had built him to be in her mind for 15 years. She had built a monster. Monsters were easier. Monsters didn't have dead wives they loved, and sleepless eyes, and the lost tentative quality of a man who was learning too late what things actually cost. She sat in the stairwell for 8 minutes. Then she stood up. She smoothed her uniform. She went back to work. She was in the middle of restocking the second-floor supply cart when her phone buzzed. A number she didn't know. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Ms. Hayes?" The voice was male, older, not a voice she recognized. "My name is Marcus Webb. I work on it for Vincent Corsetti's organization for 11 years. I'm calling because I think you deserve to know something before you walk into that operating room next Friday." Every cell in Serena's body went still. "How did you get this number?" she said. "I have access to information Mr. Corsetti's people don't know I have." "That's not the point." A pause. "The point is this. I know who you are, Ms. Hayes. I know your real name. I know what happened on Delancey Street." The corridor was empty. She turned to face the wall. "Say what you're gonna say," she said. "Vincent Corsetti ordered that hit. You know that, but there's something you don't know." Webb's voice was careful, deliberate, the voice of a man who had been holding something for a long time and had decided to set it down. He knew afterward, about your family, about the fact that it was the wrong address. He was given a report within 48 hours of the incident. Names, ages, everything. A pause that felt like a door swinging open. He knew there was a 17-year-old girl who survived. He knew her name, the real one, and he made a choice. Serena's hand was pressed so hard against the wall her knuckles had gone white. "What choice?" she said. "He buried it," Webb said. "All of it. No investigation, no accountability, no outreach to surviving family." He closed the file and moved on. That was standard procedure. That was how it was done. Another pause. "I'm not telling you this to destroy anything. I'm telling you because you're about to risk your life for his son, and you have the right to make that decision with everything on the table." The line was silent. "Why now?" Serena said. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I have a daughter," Webb said. "She's 17, and I looked at her this morning and I thought about the girl on Delancey Street, and I decided I was done carrying this." A beat. "What you do with it is up to you." The call ended. Serena stood with the phone in her hand in an empty hospital corridor and felt the world she had been very carefully managing break open at every seam simultaneously. He had known. Not a vague administrative knowing, a specific named documented knowing. He had held a report with her family's names on it, her parents' names, Samuel's name, her name, and he had looked at it and closed it and walked away and gone on to build an empire and fall in love and have a son and stand in a hospital cafeteria 15 years later and tell her that he was counting the cost now. Now, finally now. She put the phone in her pocket. She picked up the supply cart. She walked to the end of the corridor and she turned the corner and she kept walking because that was the only thing left that she knew how to do. Keep walking, keep moving, one foot after the other, the way she had done since she was 17 years old. And everything she loved was gone, and all that remained was the direction of forward. But something had changed. For 2 days, she had been carrying the knowledge of who he was and managing it, containing it, metabolizing it, converting it into something workable, the way she had converted every other unbearable thing into something she could live alongside. She had been doing it successfully. She had been in the same room with him, at the same table, and she had managed. She could not manage this. He had known her brother's name and buried it. He had known she existed and said nothing. He had let her grow up in a shelter 4 blocks from a street she could no longer walk down, let her rebuild a life from the ground up without a single resource or acknowledgement or the most basic decency of being told the truth. And then 15 years later, he had sat across from her and said, "I'm trying to count the cost now." And she had almost. She stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the corridor, and she did the thing she had not done in 11 years. She cried, not loudly, not with any of the theater that the moment deserved, just silently standing straight, tears moving down her face with the quiet efficiency of something that had been waiting too long for permission. She didn't cover her face. She didn't look for a private corner. She just stood there and let it happen because there was no managing this. There was no converting this. There was no distance left to maintain. 20 seconds. That was all she allowed. 20 seconds of that 11-year backlog releasing through the only exit it had ever had. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand. She started walking again. The pre-op was in 5 days. The procedure was in 6. Lucas Corsetti had maybe 2 weeks of margin left without the transplant and 91% compatibility with her genetic profile and a 70 to 80% survival rate if she got on that table and did the thing she had agreed to do. None of that had changed. She had made a promise to Samuel. She had made it before she knew whose son she was saving. She had kept it before she knew who his father was. And now she knew everything. The full cost, the full truth, the whole unbearable arithmetic of it, and she was going to have to decide whether the promise was conditional on the worthiness of its recipient. She already knew the answer. She had always known the answer. It was the reason she'd walked through the door, the reason she'd called with her genetic file, the reason she'd sat in the cafeteria and let a man she should hate tell her his dead wife's name. A promise made to a 17-year-old boy dying on a sidewalk was not a conditional thing. It was not subject to revision based on who else was in the room. Samuel had not asked her to save good people. He had not asked her to save deserving people. He had asked her not to let someone die the way he did if she could stop it. She could stop it, the promise held. But she was done managing what she knew. She pulled out her phone. She found Vincent's number, the one he'd written on the cream-colored card, the one she'd memorized and entered into her phone and never used since the one call she'd made from her kitchen. She stood in the corridor and typed a message and read it back to herself once and sent it before she could revise it into something softer. After the procedure, we need to talk. Not about Lucas, about Delancey Street. She put the phone away. She pushed the supply cart to the end of the hall, and somewhere above her, 3 floors up, a baby named Lucas breathed in the steady mechanical rhythm of machines that were doing everything they could to hold the line until the woman in the gray uniform could make it to an operating room and do what she had promised a dead boy she would do. The phone buzzed in her pocket 40 seconds later. One message, 4 words. I know. I'm sorry. She did not respond. She had 5 days to decide whether sorry meant anything at all. 5 days felt like 5 minutes and 5 years at the same time. Serena went to work. She mopped floors. She restocked supply carts. She nodded at Greta and said good morning to the nurses she passed and did every small, ordinary thing that constituted a life that looked normal from the outside. She ate. She slept not well, but enough. She went to her pre-op appointment on Wednesday and let them take her blood and check her vitals and confirm everything that needed confirming, and she answered every question on the intake form with the careful precision she brought to everything, and she did not think about the 4-word message she had not responded to. I know. I'm sorry. She thought about it constantly. She had not replied. She didn't know what reply existed that was adequate to the situation. Every sentence she composed in her head sounded either too much like forgiveness or too much like a confrontation she wasn't ready to have before she'd gotten through Friday, and she needed to get through Friday. Everything else was secondary to Friday. That was what she told herself. Thursday evening, she was sitting at her kitchen table with her coat still on. She'd come home from a double shift and hadn't had the energy to take it off yet when someone knocked at her door. She froze. 3 knocks. Deliberate. Not the quick double rap of her upstairs neighbor asking about packages. Not the maintenance knock she'd been waiting 3 months on. 3 even knocks with the weight of someone who was very sure of what they were doing. She went to the door. Looked through the peephole. Vincent Corsetti was standing in the hallway of her building. He was alone. No security she could see. He was wearing the same dark jacket from the hospital, and he looked like he had spent the last 5 days doing approximately as much sleeping as she had, which was to say almost none. She stood at the door for 5 full seconds. Then she opened it. He looked at her. She looked at him. The hallway was narrow and poorly lit and smelled faintly of the Thai food someone had ordered on the 2nd floor, and neither of them said anything for a moment that went on just long enough to establish that this was not going to be a simple conversation. "How do you know where I live?" she said. "I have resources." A pause. "That's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse. I needed to talk to you before tomorrow and I couldn't do it in the hospital." "You could have called." "You don't answer when you don't want to talk to someone." He said it without accusation. "I needed to see your face." She stepped back from the door. Not an invitation exactly, just a removal of the obstacle. He took it for what it was and came inside. She didn't offer to take his jacket. He didn't ask. He stood in the middle of her small kitchen and looked at it, not with judgment. She registered, but with the particular attention of a man who was reading a life from its physical details, The way she had read the NICU from outside the glass. The single mug on the drying rack. The library books stacked on the counter. The shoebox on the shelf that she'd forgotten to put away and now wished sharply that she had. He looked at the shoebox. He looked back at her. Delancey Street, he said. Yes. You knew. He said it slowly, like a man testing the weight of each word before setting it down. You knew from the beginning, from the first night. I knew your name, she said. I didn't know for certain until I went home and opened that box. She nodded toward the shelf. It took me the rest of that night to make the connection complete. And then you came back. Yes. You saved my son, knowing. Yes. He sat down in the chair she hadn't invited him to sit in, and she noticed in the precise observational way she noticed everything that he didn't sit like a powerful man in an unfamiliar space. He sat like a man whose legs had given out on him, like something structural had gone. Tell me your real name, he said. It was the last thing and she expected him to say first. She looked at him for a long moment. Donovan, she said. Serena Donovan. My parents were Catherine and Robert Donovan. My brother was Samuel James Donovan. He was 17 years and 4 months old when he died. He is buried in Fairview County Cemetery Plot, 47 Section C. I put the marker there myself with money I saved working 2 jobs at 19 years old. She paused. I changed my name to Hayes when I was 18, my mother's maiden name. I needed to disappear, and it was the only thing I had left of her that nobody else knew about. Every word was flat and clean and exact. Not cold, she was not able to make it cold, standing in her own kitchen, saying these things to this man, but precise. Because precision was how she survived things. Vincent had not moved. His elbows were on his knees and his hands were folded between them, and he was looking at the floor with the expression of a man receiving something he had been trying not to receive for 15 years. I was told it was handled, he said. Afterward, my people told me it was a clean hit. Correct target, minimal exposure. He stopped. He looked up. I didn't ask what minimal exposure meant. I should have asked. I didn't ask because I knew that asking meant knowing, and I had built the whole machinery of what I did on not knowing the parts that would make it impossible to keep doing it. But then you were given the report, Serena said. He didn't flinch. He had known she knew. Yes. With names. Yes. My brother's name. Yes. His voice was entirely stripped down now. No management, no control, no the layers that money and power applied over a person, the way lacquer applied over wood. Just a man saying yes to a series of questions that each cost him something. I read the report. I read every name on it. I read the address, and I read the ages, and I read... He stopped, started again. There was a line at the bottom, surviving dependent, female, age 17. He looked at her directly, and his eyes were the eyes of someone in genuine pain, not the performed pain of a man trying to manage an outcome, but the real thing, the kind that had no use for the person watching it. I closed the file. I told my people to bury it, and I have been carrying that decision every day for 15 years, and it has been getting heavier every year. And I told myself it was guilt, and I told myself it was grief, and I told myself it was the cost of the life I'd chosen. But sitting in your kitchen right now, I can tell you exactly what it was. He stopped. It was cowardice. It was the purest cowardice of my life, and there has been a lot of competition for that title. The kitchen was completely silent. Serena pulled out the second chair and sat down across from him. She sat very straight. Her hands were on the table. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. If you had known before I walked into that NICU, if you had somehow known that the janitor mopping the floor outside your son's room was Serena Donovan, would you have let me near him? He looked at her for a long time. I don't know, he said. I want to tell you yes. I want to tell you that I'd like to think I would have trusted you. But the honest answer is, I don't know. Because the version of me from 2 weeks ago was still the version who buried the file, and that version didn't let things close enough to cost him. A pause. That version is gone now. I'm not sure when exactly he left. Sometime between watching you bring my son back from the dead and sitting in this chair. She believed him. That was the thing she had no defense against. She believed him, not completely. She was not capable of complete belief in a man who had done what he had done and she didn't think she should be, and she didn't think he'd want her to be, but she believed this specific thing that he was telling the truth right now, in this kitchen, in the way that people told the truth when they had run out of room to do anything else. The procedure is tomorrow, she said. I know. I'm still going through with it. He looked at her. You don't have to, given what... I know I don't have to. Her voice was firm. I made a promise. I made it before any of this. It's not a promise I made to you. It's not revocable because the situation is complicated. She looked at him steadily. Lucas didn't do anything. He's 6 days old and he has a 70 to 80% survival rate with a match and nothing without one. And that is the only math that controls this decision. His jaw was tight. He nodded once. I also need you to understand, Serena continued, that what happens after Friday is a completely separate conversation. The procedure is the promise to Samuel. Everything else is unresolved. And I don't know how it resolves. I don't know if it resolves. I understand. Do you, He looked at her with the tired, clear-eyed honesty of a man who had stopped pretending in the last hour and was not going back to it. I understand that you have every reason in the world to hate me. I understand that what I did to your family is not something that has a fix. I understand that no amount of gratitude or resource or goodwill covers a debt of that kind. He paused. And I understand that you are doing something tomorrow that I will owe you for in a way I will never be able to repay. And I'm not going to pretend any of those things aren't simultaneously true. Serena nodded. You should go, she said. He stood up. He moved toward the door and she stayed in her chair, and he stopped with one hand on the doorframe and turned back. Serena, he said. The first time he'd used just her name. It landed differently than she expected. I'm going to be outside the OR tomorrow. I know that's probably not what you want, but I'm going to be there. He paused. Not for me. I need you to know that when you come out of that room, there is someone who knows who you are. The whole name. All of it. His voice dropped. You've been alone with it for 15 years. You shouldn't have to come out of that room alone with it too. She didn't answer. He left. She sat at the table for a long time. Then she got up, took the shoebox from the shelf and opened it. She took out Samuel's unfinished letter, the one he had been writing to a girl he liked, 4 lines of his careful, slightly lopsided handwriting, and she held it in both hands and read it the way she'd read it 100 times. Not for the words, for the handwriting. The specific living pressure of a hand she would never hold again, that had moved a pen across a page and left behind the only proof that he'd existed that was entirely purely his. She put it back. She closed the box. She went to bed. She slept. Not well, but enough. The operating room was cold the way operating rooms were always cold, a fact she knew from research and confirmed now in the particular way of things you've studied from the outside and then suddenly find yourself inside. She lay on the table and counted the ceiling tiles while the anesthesiologist explained what she was going to feel, which was nothing, which was the point. Dr. Farnsworth stood at the edge of her vision. Ready? Farnsworth asked. Yes, Serena said. She thought about Samuel. She thought about him the way she always thought about him in the moment she needed him most. Not the dead version, not the version from that night, but the earlier version, the alive one, the one who had taught her to breathe through hard things and could eat an entire box of cereal in one sitting, and had once cried at a nature documentary and tried to pretend he hadn't. The real one. I'm keeping the promise, she thought. I'm keeping it. The anesthesia arrived in her arm and the ceiling tiles went soft, and the last thing she heard before the room went away entirely was the clean, steady rhythm of a monitor. And she thought 94%, 94%, and then there was nothing. She came back slowly. The way you came back from general anesthesia was not like waking up. It was more like being assembled one piece at a time in no particular order. Sound arrived first, then weight, the specific heaviness of a body that had been through something and was reporting back. Then pain, low and wide across her lower back, the exact location and quality Farnsworth had described, so she knew what it was, and that it was correct, and that it meant the procedure had happened. She opened her eyes. The recovery room was dim and quiet. A nurse was adjusting something at the IV pole. Serena blinked twice, oriented herself, and did a quick internal accounting, a live stable back pain, within expected parameters, hands functional. She curled her fingers slowly against the blanket. Both hands responded. Welcome back, the nurse said. She had the warm, competent manner of someone who did this 20 times a week and had never stopped meaning it. Everything went beautifully. Farnsworth will be in shortly. Serena nodded. Her throat was dry. There's a man waiting, the nurse added with the particular neutrality of hospital staff who had seen every variety of human relationship and had learned to present information without editorializing. He's been outside since we went in. He said to tell you, and I'm quoting, 94%. Something moved through Serena's chest, deep and complicated. Tell him I'm awake, she said. He came in 3 minutes later. He stopped at the foot of the bed, not crowding her, not taking up more space than the situation allowed, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who has been standing outside a door for 3 hours, imagining everything that could go wrong, and is now recalibrating to the reality of everything being against all odds. All right. 94%, she said. That was your number, he said, from the first night. I asked Farnsworth what it meant, and she told me it was his oxygen saturation when he stabilized. He paused. It seemed like the right thing to say. It was. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat down. Not close. The appropriate distance. The distance of two people who had enormous amounts of unfinished business and had agreed without discussing it to let the immediate moment be what it was before tackling any of the rest. How do you feel, he asked. Like someone harvested my bone marrow, she said. He almost smiled. The same ghost of one as before, but this time it made it a little further toward the surface before it dissolved back into the weight of everything else. Farnsworth appeared 12 minutes later with the preliminary results. She was trying to keep her face professionally composed and not entirely succeeding, which told Serena the number before she said it. Engraftment indicators are extremely positive, Farnsworth said. The harvest yield exceeded targets. We've already begun preparation for Lucas's transplant. We're moving forward this afternoon, she paused. The early markers are very, very good. Serena closed her eyes for a moment. Thank you, she said. Farnsworth squeezed her arm once precisely and left. The room was quiet. Vincent was looking at his hands. She said the early markers are good, Serena said. I heard. He's going to be okay. She said it not as comfort and not as prediction, but as a decision. The same way she'd said schedule it to Farnsworth. The same way she'd said I know to Webb on the phone. The same way she'd said every important thing in her life as a fact she was choosing to make true by the force of her commitment to it. He's going to be okay. Vincent looked up, and something happened in his face that she had never seen there before and had not expected. The control the absolute engineered decades-built control that he wore over every expression, every response, every moment of visible feeling came completely apart. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly and entirely the way a wall came down when the thing holding it together had finally been removed. His eyes went bright and his jaw worked once and he put his face in his hands. He didn't make a sound. But his shoulders moved. Serena looked at the ceiling. She gave him that. The private dignity of falling apart in front of someone without being watched. When he lifted his face again, he was back mostly. The edges of him were still undone in a way they'd never be fully sealed again, but he was back. I don't know how to do this, he said. His voice was rough. I don't know how to be a person who owes a debt this size. I've been on the other side of it my whole life. You don't owe me, Serena said. Serena, you don't. She turned her head to look at him. What you owe is to Samuel, to my parents, to every decision you made that can't be undone. You owe that to the truth of what happened, and the only currency that debt accepts is who you are from this point forward. She paused. What you owe me is nothing. I acted on a promise. The promise is kept. We're not square, that's not the right word for it. We will never be square, but we're not in a transaction either. He looked at her for a long moment. What are we? He asked. It was a genuine question. Not romantic, not strategic, just a man who had been stripped of every framework he'd ever used to categorize relationships and was asking honestly what category this was. She thought about it. Complicated, she said. He nodded slowly. I can work with complicated. I know you can. She closed her eyes again. The exhaustion was coming in now, the post-anesthesia weight settling over her like something physical. There are things I need from you, not for me, for Samuel. Tell me. His grave, she said. The marker I put there when I was 19, it's starting to deteriorate. I've been meaning to replace it for 3 years and I haven't had the money. She paused. I want a proper stone. His full name, his dates, and one line. I'll give you the line. Done, Vincent said without hesitation. I'm not finished. Her voice was even. I want a record. An actual record formally documented of what happened on Delancey Street. Not buried, not sealed. Documented. My family's names are the truth of what happened, the accountability. Not necessarily public, but it needs to exist somewhere that isn't a closed file in a dead man's office. She opened her eyes and looked at him. They need to have existed on paper as something more than collateral damage. His jaw was tight. I'll do it. I know you will, she said, because if you don't, I will. And I've had 15 years to figure out how. He held her gaze. Something passed between them that was not forgiveness. She was not there yet, and she might never fully arrive there. And that was the truth of it, but it was something, recognition maybe. The particular recognition of two people who had been on opposite sides of the same catastrophe and were now, without anyone planning it, sitting in the same room, breathing the same air and trying to figure out what came next. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table. She looked at it, a message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it and read 3 lines, and then she read them again, because the first time through, she wasn't sure she'd understood correctly. She had understood correctly. What is it? Vincent said. He read her face before she could arrange it. She handed him the phone. He read it. His expression went completely still. The message was from Dr. Farnsworth's assistant. 5 sentences, clinical, factual, precise. The bone marrow from the harvest had already been cross-matched against the transplant preparation panel. The compatibility confirmation had come back an hour ago from the secondary lab. 93% match. 1 point lower than the primary panel. Still exceptional. But alongside the match result, the secondary panel had flagged something. A genetic marker, rare specific, the kind that appeared in less than 2% of the population. It had been noted in the lab report as clinically irrelevant to the transplant. It appeared in both the donor profile and Lucas Corsetti's profile, the same marker, identical expression. The lab note at the bottom read, flagged for physician review. Familial marker patterns suggest possible biological relation. Recommend genetic counseling consultation. Vincent looked up from the phone. His face had gone the color of the wall behind him. That's not possible, he said. Serena was very still. No, she said slowly. It's not possible. But even as she said it, her mind was already running the arithmetic she did not want to run, the arithmetic of a 17-year-old girl who had survived a night that killed everyone else. And the months after, in the shelter 4 blocks from Delancey Street, and the faces she couldn't quite remember. Because grief had blurred everything from that period, and the one gap in what she'd rebuilt, that she'd never been able to fully account for the 1 year that sat in her personal history, like a room with a locked door that she'd never opened, because she'd told herself she didn't need to know what was inside. She pressed her hands flat against the blanket. Get Farnsworth, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Serena, get her now. He was on his feet and out the door in 4 seconds. Serena lay in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of her own breathing and felt the last wall she'd built, the deepest one, the one she hadn't even known was a wall, begin to move. The arithmetic was quiet. The arithmetic was merciless. And somewhere 3 floors above her, a baby named Lucas, who had entered the world the same night his mother left it, who had stopped breathing in his first week of life and been brought back by the hands of a woman who had not yet understood what she was doing, lay in an incubator under warm lights and waited. Farnsworth came back into the room with the kind of controlled urgency that told Serena everything before a single word was spoken. She had a tablet in one hand and a printed lab report in the other, and her face was doing the thing faces did when the information they were carrying was larger than the container of professional composure. Vincent was 3 steps behind her. He closed the door. Tell me what the marker means, Serena said. Her voice was flat and steady, and she had both hands pressed against her thighs under the blanket. Farnsworth set the tablet down on the bedside table and turned it to face her. The marker is called Delta 7 familial cluster. It's a genetic signature non-coding, meaning it doesn't affect health outcomes, which is why it's rarely screened for outside of academic genetic research. It appears in less than 2% of the general population. She paused. When it appears in two unrelated individuals, the statistical probability of coincidence is approximately 1 in 40,000. And when it appears in two individuals who share a biological parent, Serena said slowly, what is the probability then? Farnsworth met her eyes. Near certain. The room held its breath. Vincent was very still near the door. Serena looked at the lab report. She looked at the numbers. She was a woman who trusted numbers, had always trusted numbers over stories, over feelings, over the versions of events that people constructed to make their own histories livable. Numbers did not manage their presentation. Numbers did not bury files. I need you to explain something to me, she said to Farnsworth. In plain language, what exactly is the lab saying? The lab is saying that you and Lucas share a genetic marker that at this expression level and pattern is consistent with a half-sibling relationship. Farnsworth said it cleanly and without ornament because she was a woman who respected her patients enough to give them the truth in full. It is not a confirmed result. To confirm, we would need a full sibling panel, but the preliminary indication is significant. Serena turned her head and looked at Vincent. He had not moved from the door. His face was the face of a man standing at the exact point where two versions of his life, the one he'd known and the one he hadn't had, just collided at full speed, and he was still in the moment before the impact fully registered. Elena, Serena said, was she Lucas's biological mother? Yes. No hesitation. 100% yes. Then the shared marker doesn't come from her side. He said nothing. His jaw was tight. Vincent. Her voice was quiet, but it had a core of iron in it. I need you to answer a question, and I need the truth. Not the managed version. Not the version that protects something. The truth. She waited until his eyes came to hers. Did you ever know my mother, Catherine Donovan? Her maiden name was Catherine Walsh. She lived on Delancey Street. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds was a very long time. I was 23, he said. His voice was barely above the register of sound. I was 23 years old, and I had just taken over from my father, and I was not the person I became later, or I was in the process of becoming him. And there was a woman, he stopped. A woman I met at a fundraiser my father's organization sponsored. She was married. I knew she was married. It lasted 3 months and ended when she found out she was pregnant and her husband. She told me the child wasn't mine, and I chose to believe it because it was easier to believe it. He stopped again. I never saw her again. Serena's whole body had gone absolutely still. You're saying, she said carefully, that you believed my mother when she said the child wasn't yours. Yes. And you never followed up. You never checked. No. So for 23 years, Serena said her by beginning to gain something that was not quite volume but was approaching it. You have been walking around in the world not knowing whether you had a child. And then your organization killed the family of that child. And then you read a report with her name on it and buried it. She was sitting up straighter now against the pain in her back that she was entirely ignoring. And then that child grew up and became a janitor in a hospital and saved your son's life. And it turns out, she stopped. Her voice had reached the edge of something. She pulled it back. It turns out she may have saved her own brother. The word brother sat in the room like a detonation. Lucas, her brother. Not metaphorically, not the way Samuel had been her brother. Biologically, genetically, the baby with the curled hands who had been dying in an incubator and whom she had pressed her fingers beneath the jaw of and breathed back into the world her brother. Farnsworth quietly said she would give them a moment and left. Vincent crossed the room in 4 steps and sat down, not in the chair on the edge of it, forward elbows on his knees, the posture of a man who needed to be close to something and didn't know what. Serena, don't. She held up one hand. Give me a minute. He gave her the minute. She used it to breathe, to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To let the information move through her the way very large things moved, not all at once, because all at once would break something, but in stages and manageable pieces the way floodwater moved through a house when the walls were still standing. Her mother had known, or suspected, or been afraid to know. She had chosen Robert Donovan, a good man, her husband, the man who had been her father in every way that mattered, and she had kept the secret and taken it with her to a grave she now shared with the 17-year-old boy who had wanted to be a mechanic and been afraid of spiders. Samuel had not shared her blood biologically, and he had been more her brother than anyone on earth. Lucas shared her blood biologically, and he was 6 days old and fighting for his life and had no idea she existed. She breathed. "The full panel," she said finally. "How long does it take?" 24 hours for a rush result, Vincent said. He was watching her with the focused, careful attention of a man who was trying to read how she was and not interfere with whatever she was working through. "Order it," she said. "Already done. I called Farnsworth from the hallway." She looked at him. "You called it before I told you to." "I assumed you'd want it." A pause. "I wanted it." She studied his face. The truth was still there, fully exposed, no lacquer, no management. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and hadn't yet decided what to put back and what to leave out. She recognized that look. She had seen it in her own mirror at 17 and 20 and 26 and again this morning. "I need to ask you something difficult," she said. "Ask." "If the full panel confirms it." She stopped, started again. "If Lucas is my brother, if that's real, what do you want from that?" She held his gaze directly. "Because I need to know who I'm dealing with. I need to know if this is something you're going to use or something you're going to honor." The question landed the way she'd intended, not as an accusation, but as a test. The kind of test that only had one right answer and that the person being tested either passed or didn't, and she would know the difference. He didn't look away. "I want nothing from it, nothing for me." He paused. "I want Lucas to have a sister, if she'll have him." Another pause, heavier. "And I want to spend the rest of my life being a person who deserves to be in the same room as both of you, whether I ever fully get there or not." She held his gaze for a long time. "That's the right answer," she said. "I know it's the right answer. I also mean it, which is a different thing." She almost let the corner of her mouth move. She stopped it, but it had tried, and they both noticed, and that small, involuntary thing was its own kind of answer to a question neither of them had asked out loud yet. "Go see your son," she said. "I need to sleep." He stood. He moved to the door. He stopped. "Serena." He turned back once more. "The line for Samuel's marker. You said you'd give me the line." She had forgotten she'd said that. The conversation in her kitchen felt like a different lifetime. She was quiet for a moment, and then the line came to her the same way the truest things always came, fully formed, without revision, just there. "He was here," she said. He was here, and it was enough." Vincent nodded once. His throat moved. "I'll have it done by next week," he said. He left. She closed her eyes. She slept for 4 hours, dreamless and deep, the sleep of a body that had been pushed to the edge of its resources and was now demanding payment. When she woke, the room was different. Light, the low gold of late afternoon, and there was a nurse she hadn't seen before adjusting the IV, and the pain in her back had settled from sharp to the broad, manageable ache of something healing, rather than something broken. She lay still for a moment and let herself exist without thinking, which was the rarest luxury she had, and one she almost never allowed. Just the room, just her own breathing, just the ordinary miracle of being alone, animal, and functional, and still against all available evidence here. Then she thought about Lucas. She thought about his hands curled at his sides, like two questions. She thought about the number 94 climbing on the monitor. She thought about pressing her fingers under his jaw and counting 4 degrees and feeling the ventilator change. She thought about doing all of that without knowing, without any of the information she now had, and she thought it was always him, even then. Even before the name Corsetti meant anything to her, even in that first second, when she pressed her palm against the glass of the NICU and saw a baby who was dying and felt the thing inside her that would not let her walk away, it was always him. Some part of her had always known which direction to walk. Her phone was on the bedside table. She picked it up. She had 12 messages, Greta twice checking in, with the careful worry of a woman who knew something significant was happening, but not what. Farnsworth's assistant, once confirming the rush panel, was in progress. And from Vincent, 4 messages over the past 3 hours, each one brief. The first Lucas's transplant prep is complete. They're ready to proceed. The second, an hour later, procedure started. Early response indicators are positive. The third, 2 hours after that, he's holding. Farnsworth says the initial engraftment response is stronger than projected. The fourth sent 20 minutes ago. He's going to make it. She said it directly. Not maybe. He is going to make it. Serena read the fourth message 3 times. Then she set the phone down on her chest and stared at the ceiling and let the thing she'd been holding at arm's length for 14 days, the thing she'd been refusing to fully feel because feeling it before it was certain was a luxury she couldn't afford, she let it come. Relief, real complete structural relief, the kind that changed the shape of the room. She pressed both hands flat against her sternum. Samuel, she thought. I kept it. I kept the whole thing. The tears came again, not the 20-second controlled release from the hospital corridor, but something longer and quieter and more thorough, the kind of crying that had a job to do and was doing it with full attention. She didn't try to stop it. She let it run its course the way you let a fever run its course when the fever was doing the necessary work of clearing something out. When it was done, she felt hollowed out and clean the way the air felt after a long rain. She asked the nurse to bring her a wheelchair. The nurse raised an eyebrow. I just need to see something, Serena said. 1 floor up, 10 minutes. The nurse looked at her chart, looked at her, sighed in the specific way of hospital professionals who had learned that certain patients were going to do what they were going to do regardless of protocol. 10 minutes, she said. I'm setting a timer. The NICU on the 3rd floor was quieter at this hour. The security presence had reduced since the transplant had moved forward, 2 men instead of 4, and they recognized her now, both of them, and neither of them moved to stop her as she rolled the wheelchair to the glass partition outside Lucas's room. Vincent was inside. He was sitting in a chair beside the incubator, with one hand resting near the edge of it, not touching the way the nurses had shown him, because the baby needed minimal stimulation, but close. Present. The posture of a man who had nowhere else on earth he needed to be. He looked up and saw her through the glass. She looked at the incubator. At the small boy inside it, his numbers stable on the monitor, oxygen 96%, heart rate strong, and even the clean, steady lines of a body that had been given what it needed and was doing the work of living. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. The same hand, the same motion, the beginning of everything again. Vincent stood up and came to the glass on his side. He stood there looking at her with his hand raised and placed it against the glass on the other side, directly across from hers, nothing between them but the thickness of the pain. They stayed like that for a moment that had no precise duration long enough to mean something short enough to not need words. Then Serena lowered her hand. She looked past him at Lucas. Tell him, she said just loud enough to carry through the door that was cracked an inch. When he's old enough. Tell him the whole story. Don't manage it, don't edit it, the whole thing. She paused. He deserves to know who he is and where he comes from and what it can't. Vincent nodded once. His eyes were bright. I'll tell him, he said. All of it. Including Samuel. Especially Samuel. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she turned the wheelchair back toward the elevator because 10 minutes was 10 minutes and the nurse had set a timer. And Serena Hayes, who had spent her entire life honoring the things she said she would do, was not going to start breaking small promises now. The full genetic panel came back the next morning at 7:42. Farnsworth delivered it in person, which told Serena the answer before she opened the envelope. She opened it anyway. She read the number at the top of the first page. 97.3% probability of half-sibling biological relationship. She set the paper down on the blanket. She sat with it for exactly 60 seconds. Let it be what it was. Let it settle into the structure of her life, in the place that had always been empty, the gap she'd stopped trying to name the room she'd kept locked for 32 years, because she hadn't known what was inside. Now she knew. Inside was a 6-day-old boy with curled hands and 96% oxygen saturation who was going to grow up without his mother, and with a father who was in the process of becoming someone worth growing up with, and who had, without knowing it, been saved twice by his own sister in the first week of his life. She called Vincent. He answered on the first ring. You saw it, he said. 97.3, she said. A silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that existed between two people who were standing at the beginning of something enormous and were both taking a breath before they stepped forward. What do you want to do, he asked. It was the right question. He had learned over the course of these 2 weeks that Serena Hayes was not a woman you made decisions for. She was a woman you asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything, without the comfort of wishful thinking, without the distortion of fear, with the plain, clear-eyed precision that had been her inheritance from a life that had demanded it. She thought about Lucas growing up knowing he had a sister. She thought about what it meant to be someone's family, not biologically, not on paper, but in the real way. The way Samuel had been hers, the way her parents had been hers, the way that the people you chose and the people who chose you built something that blood alone never could. She thought about Vincent, who had done terrible things and was choosing to become someone different, which was not the same as being forgiven, but was not nothing either. Who had looked at her across a cafeteria table and told her the truth about himself without being asked. Who had stood outside an operating room for 3 hours and sent her the words 94% when she woke up. She thought about the promise she had made on a sidewalk to a boy who had wanted to be a mechanic. She thought about the shoebox on her shelf. "I want to go to see Samuel's grave," she said. "Before the new marker is placed, I want to go and tell him." She paused. "And then I want to come back here and hold my brother." The silence on the other end of the line had a quality she'd never heard from him before. It was the silence of a man who had been carrying something unendurable for a very long time and had just been told that he could set part of it down. "I'll drive you," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I called." She was discharged 2 days later against the recommended timeline, and with the resigned blessing of a nursing staff that had learned arguing with her was a form of energy expenditure with no return. She walked out of St. Raphael's Medical Center under her own power slowly, with the careful, deliberate steps of someone whose body was healing and who was allowing it the respect of not rushing. The grave was a 40-minute drive outside the city. She directed Vincent from the passenger seat without needing to look at a map. She had the route memorized the way she had everything memorized that mattered to her in her body below the level of thinking. He didn't talk during the drive. Neither did she. The silence between them had changed, and it was no longer the silence of two people maintaining careful distance, but the silence of two people who had said enough true things to each other that quiet no longer felt like a gap to be managed. It felt like a space they both fit in. The cemetery was quiet, October grass, the particular quality of light that came at that hour through that season. She knew the path to plot 47 Section C without looking at the signs. She stood at the grave. The marker she had placed at 19 was weathered and the letters still legible, but the edges soft, the stone itself beginning the long, patient work of returning to the ground. She crouched down, which pulled at her back, and she pressed one hand against the top of the stone the way she'd pressed her hand against the glass of the NICU. The same gesture. She noticed it. Samuel would have said something funny about that. He had always been the one who noticed the patterns she made without knowing. "I kept it," she said quietly. "The whole thing, I kept it in a way I didn't expect, and it cost more than I knew it would, but I kept it." She paused. "And I found something out. Something about where I come from that changes. It changes some of the map." She pressed her palm flat against the stone. "You would have had opinions about it, strong ones, probably wrong ones, and you would have made me laugh in the middle of being serious about it, and that is the thing I miss most of all." Her voice stayed steady. "He's going to be okay. The baby. His name is Lucas, and he's going to be okay." She stayed crouched for another moment. Then she stood. Vincent was standing 20 feet back, hands in his jacket pockets, giving her everything she needed without being asked. She turned and walked back to him, and they stood together for a moment looking at the stone. "The line is right," he said quietly. "He was here, and it was enough." "Yes," she said. They drove back to the city as the light was fading, the particular low amber light of a day ending, the kind that made everything look briefly and falsely simple. She watched it from the window and thought about the shape of a life, how it looked nothing like you expected from the inside, how it moved sideways and backward and in directions that had no names, how the thing you thought was the destination was almost never the destination, and the thing you thought was the worst moment was almost never the end. She thought about her first date at St. Raphael's, 14 months ago, pushing a cart down a corridor, working very hard at being invisible. She thought about a door she'd pushed open because she couldn't stop herself. She thought about 4 degrees. When they arrived back at the hospital, it was visiting hours, and the NICU was quieter than it had been in days. The monitors steadied the numbers holding the room, carrying the specific quality of a place where the crisis had passed, and what remained was the slower, less dramatic work of getting well. Lucas was awake. That was the thing Farnsworth had told her this morning. He was showing increased alertness, tracking light, responding to sound. The early signs of a neurological system that was intact and was beginning the long project of becoming a person. She put on gloves. She sat in the chair beside the incubator. The nurse adjusted the positioning panel and showed her where to place her hands, palms flat, fingers still warm and present, and not demanding anything, just there. She placed her hands. She felt him, the small, living warmth of him, the improbable fact of him, the 96%, and the strong, steady heartbeat of a boy who had decided in his first week of life to stay. He turned his head, a millimeter, toward her hands. She had no explanation for what she felt in that moment. She had never been good at the emotional vocabulary that other people used easily, the words that were supposed to contain the largest experiences. She had always trusted action over language, precision over expression. She had spent 15 years converting every unbearable thing into something she could work with. This she could not convert. This she could only hold. "Hi," she said quietly. Just that. He turned another millimeter. Vincent was standing at the window. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She looked at Lucas. Her brother, the words settling into her chest like something that had always been there and had finally been given its name, and she held him the way you held a very full glass. Carefully, with both hands, without spilling. Behind her, the city moved. The hospital breathed around them. The monitors counted the steady, reliable beats of a heart that had been given what it needed. Somewhere across the city, in a county cemetery 40 minutes away, a stone marked the place where a boy named Samuel had been, and been enough. And Serena Hayes, who had been Serena Donovan before she learned that survival required disappearing, who had mopped floors and studied medicine from borrowed books and kept a promise for 15 years in the dark without anyone watching, held her brother in her hands for the first time and understood that the direction she had always been walking through, every loss and every reinvention, and every door she had pushed open when every sensible instinct told her to walk away, had always been toward this. Not toward the man who had taken everything from her, but toward justice, which was too clean a word for the complicated, unfinished, ongoing work of two people trying to be honest with each other across the wreckage of an enormous wrong. Toward this, the small, warm weight of a life that had decided to stay. The promise kept. The boy in the grave finally answered. She pressed her palms more firmly against the warmth of him, and the monitors held steady, and the room was quiet, and Serena Hayes, who had never once in 32 years gotten anything she hadn't fought for alone, held her brother and let the fighting for just this one moment be finished.